Welcome back to Compact Convos. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to be talking about specialty troops. These are very, very niche troops in there, and the first one we're going to talk about are couriers. The reason we're going to talk about that is we really don't have to base or paint those. Those are a campaign thing. But Caleb, couriers, and my favorite, Corporal Doolittle. He's my favorite courier. How do couriers come into play for the tabletop?
Yeah, couriers, we actually do have just a very few painted. Couriers are more of your units to deliver information. Um, and you can add them into your tabletop if you want more realism. Like for instance, if your commanders are on either side of the board, don't let them talk directly to each other. Have them physically write down the dispatch, give it to the courier base, and have them physically move it across the board until it reaches them. Then you can read the letter. So couriers are really good, really more to add realism into your battles. Campaign mode, it's kind of given, right? That's how information's getting delivered between commanders. It adds a really good command and control mechanic. The fun thing about couriers, though, is that they can be intercepted. And whoever the umpire or whoever running the game, they can kind of work as to how the courier's information either gets decrypted or maybe they torture the guy, right? But I know in the campaign game, or actually in battle, we actually have a rule: if a courier gets captured, he has to roll a certain way in order to evade capture to deliver his orders. But if you have a written dispatch underneath that courier moving across the battle board and he gets captured, the enemy can just pick up that piece of paper. So if it's like, on the paper, oh man, I can't wait for that division to come behind them, and they read it, they're like, oh, all right. So couriers they're really just there to add realism. You don't have to. This isn't a must have for armies, but I definitely think we like to use it because it just gives you a bit more of that in the era feeling, right? Like you're getting orders, you're delivering orders the exact same way commanders at the time were. So if you really want to get in their shoes, add couriers.
I agree. It does add a good degree of realism. And the next one we're going to talk about and how would we base these, paint them, are shore party sailors, not necessarily the Marines like we'd already talked about, but just a quick little, think of Star Trek, a shore party. But they're just going to come in there, do whatever mission set they have. What about those?
Yeah, so your naval landing parties, they will include Marines, but a lot of times it would be sailors because Marines only make up a small percentage of the actual crew. And if anyone's ever watched the miniseries Hornblower, you'll see like the Royal Navy will send their sailors onto boats stacked as a landing party, just the same as they will the Marines. So these sailors, although they are good at hand-to-hand combat, they're not going to have, actual formal line training. So you probably have them shoot and hit like militia. You're going to have a mix of axes, maybe spears, pistols, muskets. So these aren't really like hard hitting like line infantry units. Maybe give them the same range stats as militia, but the same melee stats as line infantry, just depending. These are really viable for amphibious assault based scenarios, coastal raids, and maybe even river crossing operations. So I would say these are not units that you can deploy inland. These are only units that you can use when you're doing purely a coastal battle. So you can't like land them on the coast and then march them 50 miles inland to take like, I don't know, Charlotte, North Carolina. Like you can't, or South Carolina. Like you can't do that. So they're restricted, but they do give you a bit more of a boost whenever trying to do any kind of landing operation. There's plenty of times during the Napoleonic Wars, Revolutionary Wars, that sailors, it's purely a sailor based party that lands to seize maybe like a small coastal fort. Um, I mean, if you're talking about a first rate ship of the line, you got like 800 men. You just pull 200 off, you still have a somewhat combat effective ship. So it's a fun unit to add, and I can't wait to use them sometime.
Yes, is I mean, you can get down to skeleton's crew if it prize is worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, let's go into the next one is your general staff, and if a later video we'll talk more in depth about it, but your war chief, how we basing those, painting them obviously to their specific era, but talk a little bit about general staff.
Yeah, so the staffs, these are the command nodes of the battlefield. If you have multiple regiments, maybe you have multiple command staffs, but all these regiments, fall underneath a bigger unit, which has a commander as well. Um, in the Black Powder era, most men are enlisting to fight under a certain commander. At least I know with the British Army. So you would call it like Buckley's regiment, for instance, because they all enlisted underneath like a Colonel Buckley. Um, so whenever that commander is killed, that has a larger morale effect than, say, the Civil War, because these men are enlisting to fight under a specific man. Um, the commander has a lot of abilities, not really combat related. He can still get in a fight, sure, but his ability is more for command. So, like, for instance, in our game, the general staff has a command radius of like 25 inches. So, all the units underneath his command can only be commanded within 25 inches because the general can only yell so far. His trumpeter can only trumpet so loudly. So it kind of gives a bit more command and control. Sometimes you have to have your general up in the thick of the fighting to keep the morale up. We normally base those about 5 staff to a single base. So you have 5 men. It takes 5 hits to destroy a unit. So very small base. And general staff should not be great in a fight, right? If you're charging heavy cavalry of 21 heavy cav units versus a 5-man staff, right? The commander should have a chance, but not a good one. But like I said, he's more the command and control. Once he dies or he's taken off, then whatever units underneath his command should receive some kind of morale penalty. And we do have a secession of command rule. If the main commander is killed, then the XO, the executive officer, will step up and attempt to take command. And we make our players roll to see how well the executive officer takes over. We also have it to where if you roll a 6 while shooting at the general staff, that is the shot that instantly kills the general. So if I'm hitting the general staff multiple times, it could be the general's the last one in the staff, right? So a lot of cool ways to go about it. I know a lot of battles have hinged on the fact that a general is alive or a general is dead. So, and you can have as many, like if you have 8 players versus 8 players, you could have 8 general staff on the board, right? So we generally like to make every player be a general staff, and that staff commands X amount of units.
I like it. Um, Now we're getting into some scouts and patrols. I know we have bases for that. It's not one that we've used too often because it's a relatively new game piece for us. But tell us a little more about scouts and patrols, how to paint them, how to base them, etc.
Yeah, so scouts and patrols, kind of think of these as like your pickets. So if you don't want to send your whole army, let's say to a wood line to scout it out, take an infantry company and split it up. So how we have it is a single base of an infantry company can split up into 5 small tiny bases. And we normally put 5 infantry on these tiny bases. And so now an infantry company that could only, is only like 4 inches long can now cover a frontage of maybe 20 inches. So this is a good way to get better eyes and ears on the enemy without having to send a larger dedicated force. Now, how we have it is that after 1 hit, these patrols are routing. They're running away. 2 hits, they're destroyed because it's only 5 men. So if you are relying on patrols as a actual combat effective unit, you're probably in some trouble. Now, these are good to, maybe harass the enemy, kind of like we were talking about Cav in a previous video. These are really good to maybe fool the enemy into thinking there's larger force there, or to fool the enemy into thinking like, oh, they have this entire front of the line covered with troops, when in actuality, I only have maybe about 40 men there. So it's a good way to fool the enemy for sure. But casualties that are taken there, you can reform these patrols back into their company. In order to avoid a lot of confusion, we only allow 1 infantry company at a time to be broken up into patrols. Because if I said I want my entire army of 50 infantry companies to be broken up into patrols, it's just going to be a mess. It's going to be too much to worry about for the umpire to manage. So just keep that in mind when using patrols. They need to be used sparingly. We recommend just one company at a time per side, but their uses are very interesting. I mean, if you don't know where the enemy is, split up an infantry company into 5 patrols and send those 5 patrols in different directions to hopefully find the enemy. So now you don't have to commit a full company or a full like cavalry troop to search for it. Now you have, more bang for your buck, sort of thing.
They can also split into maybe forage, depending on the time of year and what supplies you need.
Mm-hmm.
And they cover more ground. They theoretically get more food, berries, meat, what have you. And then going to the next one is supply columns. I know we briefly talked about it in our logistics video, but how do we base them? How do we paint them? What does supply column even look like?
Yeah, so supply columns, these aren't really, a lot of people think of these as more aesthetic pieces, to make the battlefield look good, and they do. If you do want to make them actually useful on the battlefield, these are more useful for like battle scenarios. So, first of all, a base, you could make it 4 horses in a wagon. Boom. Instantly, you have a supply wagon. If you get multiple of them, that's your supply column. If you want to implement these into a battle, you could say that the supply wagon has a supply radius. And if you're tracking ammunition or even casualties, then you could say, okay, so as long as this company is within the radius of the supply wagon, they keep getting restocked ammunition. So if you're calculating ammunition, these supply wagons actually become very important because suddenly you're moving supply wagons all up and down your front line, trying to keep units either reinforced or resupplied. You could even say that perhaps you have like a surgeon's wagon and troops that are injured within this radius, you can roll to see how much damage you get taken off because perhaps there's a surgeon in the wagon that can do on the spot treatment for some soldiers and send them back into the fight. So all of these are mainly seen as aesthetic pieces, and they do make a board look really good. There are times that you can actually implement these as an actual unit into the game itself.
Yes, we need early mash units. Um,
Mhm.
so the next one is going to be sappers. What are sappers? How do we paint them, base them, etc.?
So you definitely want to base your sappers. How I do it is I make it about 20 to 25 minis per base. You'll want these guys to look like they are digging. They're actively working on something. So I like sprinkle sand on the base, paint it to look like dirt. And if you buy the ones from Bacchus, they already have shovels and pickaxes, and I just put them up against that, and it looks like they're actively working. Um, I know you know a large difference between sappers and engineers, Nick. What are you thinking about that?
So what I know the biggest difference is that sappers, I know in today's military, they all fall under the engineering corps, but sappers destroy stuff, engineers kind of build stuff. So sappers, they were taken within, the company was formed of men from the regiment, and they would just be people who have a natural knack of just destroying things or who just love being overly aggressive. Then going into, you know, engineers is they're generally of a hardier stock. They're bigger because they're going to be digging trenches. They're going to be putting up fortifications. They're going to be the ones who are literally building stuff that either the army will need or might need. And depending on your time frame, your engineers could be, um, somebody who's a carpenter is going to be, automatically lumped into the engineer company because we got to create, fortifications. We got to create a pontoon bridge, what have you. And they're going to naturally fall into that, or they're going to go pick their biggest dudes to, have hard backs, not necessarily their biggest ones, because that would go more for like your guard infantry and whatnots. But they're going to pick some strong dudes who are just going to go there. They're these guys who are good, what we would call a natural mechanic now. They're just natural builders. Um, and then to base them, yeah, I think 25 would be very appropriate. And then implementing them on the battlefield, I can see that. Not, I don't know about every battle, but you're doing a siege, you're definitely going to want some sappers at that siege. To we always talk about how we wish we could get sappers to dig underneath. That way we can plant explosives, do things. But the sappers there, they can like Helm's Deep with that little orc running through, blowing up the wall. The sappers are there to help set some charges, blow up your if you have a palisade fort, blow up your palisade fort. Just help naturally, just create some chaos and destroy some stuff. So maybe the defenders need to target that one. Engineers, if you have them on the battlefield, and I recognize them as engineers. Okay, cool. What is he building right there? And then that obviously would go up to the umpire and your time frame of what you need. But they definitely, help make the similar to supply columns. They help make that board look prettier, but they also have a practical use. We haven't, as far as I know, used them to where they have to like shoot and use melee. But for sappers, it might be a little less than light infantry. For engineers, you might be looking at the same as militia. That's just
Yeah,
me
absolutely.
coming up off the top of my head right there. Anything else on engineers?
Yeah, I would say that both of those should not be expected to be in melee or combat at all. These are meant to follow or be with combat units to work. And I would say engineers are more, as you mentioned earlier, they're a bit more learned. They're maybe graduates of an academy of some sort. They know what they're doing. So engineers might be a little bit more rare than sappers. I know normally in our game we lump engineers, sappers, and pioneers together,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not like every single regiment instantly has a engineer company or a pioneer company. These are larger assets. I know in previous games, I had to request like theater level authorization to get engineers. So I didn't automatically have them stationed with my army. These are like, hey, I need these to come from England, or hey, I need these to come from the other side of the colonies to me, because these are not there's not tons and tons and tons of engineers just running around. Like these are still specialized
Right.
troops. And so I would say keep them rare. Maybe make it a diplomatic role or make it something you're working towards. Um, to keep that in mind. Also keep things balanced. If you have too many engineers on the board, you're going to have like World War I trench lines pop up instantly. So you want to definitely limit that in the age of black powder, if anything else.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point. It does depend on the army you're at. England, the British Army, they did keep them not necessarily at like a theater level, but they did. They were more of a in a garrison type environment. So for the Revolution, New York City, think of it like that. That was the British's biggest base right there. They're going to keep things there because they don't want all these you know learned it doctors, so to speak. No, these learned it men to just die needlessly on the frontier. Um, Now, going to our last one, and one that I'm the most intrigued about, and we have not done it for 6 mil, but I know 28 mil, 15 mil, they do this, especially in the Civil War era, which we're not getting into, but musicians. How do we implement musicians? What is the role? Are they just there to raise morale, beat the drum, raise morale? Or is there a purpose to the bugle calls, the drums, what have you?
Yeah, I would say these are definitely more important when you get to like the 15 and especially 28 millimeter scale. These fife and drummers are going to be there to keep morale, keep units in step historically. That's what they're going to be used for. But they also have like a dual purpose in that now they can rally units. Like every drum beat, every fife note, like normally equals something unless they're just playing a marching tune. So you could play retreat or form up or make ready, load, all this stuff. Everything is a command being relayed, but through music. So we haven't implemented it in 6 mil, just because I think the scale's too big and it might not work unless you just made like a giant like band bass, which would be hilarious. But
Oh
I would
yeah.
say maybe if you're including that even in 6 mil, maybe say, okay, there's a morale radius around this musician's core that's there. But I know definitely 15, 28 mil, you can maybe say, okay, if the musicians are dead, now maybe orders are belated because now instead of, fife and drum playing it, you might have to actually ride over there and tell them what to do. So it could perhaps rally routing units that are routing through their radius, and it kind of adds a bit more flair and realism to your game. So it'd be cool to use musicians, but it's most certainly not a required thing. Like all the 6 mil bases we have on the command base with the flag and the standards, there's a fife and drummer there naturally, but I think 6 mil is too large of scale to kind of get down to the ways of musicians. But larger scales, 100%.
Yes, I completely agree. As much as I'd love to implement it, I think it's just too tiny of a scale to really do it the justice that it deserves. Uh, on that note, Caleb, any other specialty troops that we could be forgetting?
No, I know we mentioned earlier something about a chief's bodyguard. Next episode, we'll be talking about Native
Oh
American
yes.
units. Not really getting specifically into certain tribes, but just the types of units that, and maybe not even Native American. We could talk about like African tribesmen as well, like the Zulu Wars. But
Hmm.
we'll be talking about that briefly. If you guys can think of any specialized units that we haven't covered, throw it in the comments below. Let's talk about it. Maybe we could start implementing those in our games.
Alrighty. Until then, thanks for stopping by.
That's it for today's episode. For battles, brushes, and everything in between, make sure you subscribe and join the community. Until next time, Generals, see you on the tabletop.